Rachel Emmanuel brings the news each day. On Alberta Roundup, she has her say.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Rachel Emmanuel. Today, I am joined by fan favorite and colleague Andrew Lawton to discuss his new book, Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. Andrew, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so impressed that how quickly you pump out these books. I think all of us are just amazed at the amount of work you get done. I'm surprised you have any time for vacation between all the things you're busy doing, but I know this will be a good read. So it's my understanding this is the first biography on Pierre Poilievre. Did that surprise you that no one had rushed to write this topic before you got to it?
No, because I rushed to write it before anyone else could. That was kind of my attitude on it. So I had the idea really not long after he became the leader, but it wasn't until the fall of this year. So that was basically a year after a year after he had become the leader, that I really started working on it more formally. And I was nervous at that time that someone else would be writing it. And I was calling up all these people that I thought would be good to talk about for as sources. And I'm like, hey, by the way, has anyone else reached out to you with a similar request? And I was kind of holding my cards close to my chest, so hoping that no one else would say, oh, hang on, that's a great idea. I can do it quicker. So in that sense, I'm not surprised, but I think it was inevitable that someone was going to, and I'm honored that gets to be me.
So when you talk about making calls to discuss with sources, topics for the book, what kind of access did you actually have, for our readers who haven't maybe done this type of project before for themselves? And myself, I've never written a book before. I'm just curious, were Poilievre's people willing to speak with you about all things related to Pierre Poilievre?
It depends. So the one thing I'm very candid about is that Poilievre himself did not agree to an interview for the book. I mean, he was obviously the one interview that I would have loved to have gotten, because then you could ask him about everything that everyone else has told you about him and really get a sense beyond what I'm able to get when I do like a 12-minute interview with him for my show. He, for whatever reason, didn't agree to an interview, but I was grateful that a lot of people around him did speak. His closest advisor and former romantic partner, Jenny Byrne, spoke on the record, as did a number of his current and former colleagues in caucus, staffers, friends, a couple of family members. And some of them were very candid on the record. Others were more glowing in their praise just because of it. And then there were people that also said things on background that were quite critical in a way. So I've tried to capture what I think is a pretty holistic view of who this guy is, which I think is pretty significant. I mean, polling is showing, everyone is looking at it, that this guy is likely to be the next prime minister. Whether you like him or not, understanding who he is, where he's come from, I think is crucially important.
Obviously, you've mentioned there were some people who were willing to be critical on background because Poilievre is obviously still the leader, and anyone who wants involvement in conservative politics, especially federal conservative politics, they're going to be pretty wary of pissing him off and pissing people around him off. So were you at any point concerned that maybe people weren't exactly giving you the full truth, or were too admirable, or giving you too glossy of a picture because they still want to please the leader in hope of having a job with the Conservative Party?
I wouldn't say I was worried about it. It's always a risk. And the one thing that I found quite interesting is that there was a lot of that, but that in and of itself is also revealing of something else, which is that there's a tremendous amount of loyalty that Poilievre has cultivated from a lot of the people around him. Now, is that loyalty because people really like him and value him and respect him? Is it loyalty because they all want an appointment in his government? I don't know. I think it's probably more the former than the latter. But the one thing I will say in terms of my own process is that when I first started out interviewing people, I really wanted as many on-the-record interviews as possible. I wanted to be able to say I spoke to this person, this person, this person, this person. And after a few weeks of that, I realized, well, hang on, that I'd actually rather have information regardless of whether it's on the record. And then I can then take that information and go and verify it and ask around. Because what would happen is you'd get a little glimpse of something from someone, and then you'd mention that to someone else, and they'd, oh, I remember that, and they'd tell you more about it, and then you take what they did back to the first. And it was actually really interesting, because in some cases, I was writing about things that have gone back well over 20 years. And memories can be very fickle things. So it was actually helpful sometimes to just not be on the record with someone, to let them be candid, and then use that as sort of the baseline that I could do further research with.
So obviously, we're speaking specifically to an Alberta audience here. Pierre Poilievre is from Calgary. Do you think that my audience, after reading your book, are going to have, a newfound appreciation for Poilievre being from the West and feeling like he's really, really one of us?
So I made, because I'm interested in it, but I also think it's relevant. I really went out of my way to talk about the Alberta roots that Poilievre has, because those have been tremendously influential, not just to his own politics and life, but to, I'd say, the development of the conservative movement. I mean, this is a guy who one of his first entries into politics was being on Preston Manning's riding board in Calgary Southwest. One of his first opportunities volunteering was phone banking for Jason Kenney back when he was running for the Reform in 1997. So again, going back, almost 30 years now. And I think that has been really interesting because the modern Conservative Party has far more in common with the 1990s Reform Party than it does with the Kim Campbell Progressive Conservative Party. And a big part of that has been because Poilievre has really been along for that evolution. So I think a lot of Albertans still see him as an Easterner, like he's an Ottawa MP, but I think there's a lot of the Alberta roots that people might not understand that I hope I shine a light on in the book.
So I did speak with someone who's already read the book. They got their hands on an early copy, and they said a sentiment they were left with after reading it is that Pierre Poilievre is really someone who wanted to be prime minister from an early age and has worked towards this for a long time. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I'm glad the sentiment they left you with was not, I want my money back. That's quite encouraging. I think so, but there's a difference between someone who has entertained that idea and someone who has spent their life making sure that every single thing they do is working towards that goal. And I'm not sure he falls into that latter category. He's definitely thought about it. I mean, I've spoken to people that have said they've had conversations with him going back to when he was running for to be MP for the first time in 2004. And he talks about at some point in the future being finance minister or prime minister. So he's clearly entertained this. And he's also a calculating guy. But I don't think that his journey has been necessarily inauthentic as a result of that. I think a lot of what's happened has really been opportunity. I mean, who could have predicted the pandemic 20 years ago? Who could have predicted the shift even within the last 10 years of the Conservative Party going through the trajectory that it has post Stephen Harper? So I think in that sense, there has been a moment that he has seized, but he's also created moments as well.
So you think for people reading this book, once they're finished, they're going to be left with a positive impression of Poilievre?
I don't know. I don't know that that's true. I think that they'll be left with an understanding. And that understanding, I hope, deepens the perspective, because the problem in politics is that it's easy to two-dimensionalize your political leaders, whether you like them or dislike them. I mean, certainly it's easy to come up with these thin, shallow caricatures of people you don't like. But even people you support, you can say, oh, yeah, I agree with what he or she says on X, and you don't really know much else about them. I want to just get a sense of who he is. And I think there's something in the book for everyone. I think people that don't like him will probably not like it because I'm not just attacking him on every page, but I think they'll learn something. I think people who like him will perhaps appreciate it more. And I think people who are on the fence could come away with either perspective. But I'm not trying to persuade anyone or sell anyone on him.
What's one of your favorite anecdotes from the book?
Well, if I told you that, people wouldn't have to buy the book. Okay, there's a funny story about him pranking the vice president of Taiwan in the book, but you have to buy the book to find out what the prank is. And just in general, there was a little bit that I didn't really see, or I don't see in him, that I learned talking to people, which is his sense of humor. He actually quite likes practical jokes and has played them on his staff, some of which have actually been a little bit tawdry. So that was an interesting thing that I learned, which isn't, again, crucially important, but it's helpful in just finding a sense of his character that you don't see at a press conference or in his videos or on social media.
Yeah, I absolutely wouldn't have expected him to be the practical joke type. Okay, so
yeah, but he did it, and some of them involve like foreign accents. So not sure if CBC will like that tidbit. We'll see.
I can already see the headlines. So your book is released next week, May 28th. Andrew, where can people find it?
Anywhere and everywhere books are sold is the hope. You can get it on Amazon. Indigo, after blacklisting my book about the convoy, has put this one out on the shelves, or is going to. Independent bookstores, and also the publisher directly has it for sale online, and that is Sutherland House. But you can get it wherever is convenient for you.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, everyone, have a great week. I'll see you guys on Saturday. God bless.